October 27th, 2019, a few months after I had left, it was when I tried to take my life. And October 28th, I woke up and I realized, how dare I try and end my life because of somebody that's abused me, because somebody's alienated me from my children, that has painted a picture of me that's not true, that's told lie after lie for years. And that's when I started looking after myself.
The purpose of the show is to educate and to inspire you. Everything that is wrong with families today are the hard topics that we talk about. And both of us have been subjected to the harsh reality and trauma of custody battles. But that does not mean that we have been alone. What we've been able to do is to talk about different topics. And today's topic is resilience. And resilience is a fascinating and also a really important topic that has been studied by researchers from various fields. Did you know that resilience is not just about bouncing back from adversity? Resilient individuals are not only able to handle losing, but also to prepare for success. Humans are wired to be resilient as the most adaptive species on Earth. The ability to sweat and to run long distances have allowed us to be the most dominant species in the world. Resilience is ordinary, not extraordinary. It is not a sign of exceptional strength, but a fundamental feature of normal, healthy functioning. During this episode, we'll discuss all these issues and help you to understand how they work and how they may be helpful to you. By the end of this episode, you will be better equipped to know what to do, and we will encourage you to contact our guest from A Man's Resilience, Dave Collier. Dave, welcome to the program, and thanks for being our guest today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
We're wondering what inspired you to become an advocate for resilience after alienation, and how have you developed this important quality?
I grew up in a very loving, safe household where my parents were married from a very early age. They knew each other from public school, and there was four of us kids, and it was almost a storybook upbringing. As I grew older, I started working with abused kids and horrified to see what other kids have gone through. About the same time, I met a woman that would become my wife in 2000. And from the beginning, I noticed that her upbringing and family dynamics were very toxic. It was quite the opposite of what I knew as a child. Almost from the beginning, there were red flags. Unfortunately, I didn't listen to my intuition. I began to notice the triangulation after a while between my family and friends, myself and my girlfriend. She was putting on a different face of who she was in front of other people than what she was behind closed doors. We'd been to counseling numerous times. She didn't want to talk about herself. She wanted to make it look like everything was my issue. We began having children in 2002, and almost immediately I saw the alienation begin.
So, Dave, I
Oh,
want to stop you right there for just a second. You mentioned something that we talk about on the podcast, and usually alienation is a trend. But, like you said, you came from a very traditional upbringing, right? Parents were married. Mine were the same way. Mick, I'm not sure where yours were.
I think my parents were the same as Dave's. We have a storybook. And they were married right out of high school. Yeah. So by the time my parents were 20, they had my sister and I. So very young, right out of high school sweethearts. They knew each other since they were 4 years old, small town, all those kinds of things.
So, we are all first generation experiencing the alienation, right, in our families. And so I think that's interesting because you're right. We probably have this vision of what we think it should be and how long we last in a marriage and expectations. And so it's harder to change and walk away from that than try to work through it with somebody in some aspects, right? We think that we need to commit and stay in it. So you said you saw signs, but you didn't take that step because you were committed, and that's how we were all taught. So,
exactly. I dragged my ex to so many counselors that I've lost track of how many there were. And Even when the kids were in family counseling with us, I had missed one counseling session because I'd worked, and when I returned, the whole narrative was different. It was all focused on me, so I don't know what was said while I was gone.
And then, like you said, the alienation, you saw signs of it when you were married. And I think that's a turning point for some people and some people not, right? Because some people don't see those signs in their spouse until it happens, until they get divorced or separated. And others do see those signs. I think that's very interesting that you saw it.
Yes, the first issue I remember is when I had tried to my oldest is quite sensitive, and when I tried to set boundaries, raise my voice, that my oldest became upset that night, and I remember hearing from the hallway my ex saying to my oldest, "It's not you, it's him," trying to paint a picture of me being the bad person.
Welcome to The Aftermath, a podcast that rips the band aid off the collective scars of divorce, custody battles, and the trauma of family drama. Kendra Reiber and Mick Smith pull back the curtain and explore stories that put the heart wrenching puzzle pieces together with inspiring stories, notable experts, and actionable tips. Let the healing begin.
I noticed the reactive abuse where my ex had studied who I was and she knew what buttons to push, and she was doing it in front of the kids, again, to make me look like the bad person. It was then when I understand what the reactive abuse was that I stopped reacting to it. And that's when her mental health declined. And she even said to me, maybe I'll play head games with you then.
Mm,
Who says that to their spouse?
mhm.
Like nothing like I grew up in. And I wanted the same upbringing for my kids. And it was everything was a fight against me. And I believe that she wanted to have the kids' love for her, just for her, and she has kept the kids codependent. She needs that love for what she didn't get in her childhood. And I like to think that the kids and I are collateral damage
Mm.
for what happened to my ex in her childhood. And no matter what I did, I couldn't change things. She was bound and determined that that's the way it was going to be.
So, how did you build up that resilience?
October 27th, 2019, a few months after I had left, it was when I tried to take my life. And October 28th, I woke up and I realized, how dare I try and end my life because of somebody that's abused me, because somebody's alienated me from my children, that has painted a picture of me that's not true, that's told lie after lie for years. And that's when I started looking after myself. Self care is paramount to being able to have the strength to fight through this. And I knew that for those kids that grew up in that kind of environment, they don't know anything else. They don't know how good it can be. And then I've got to use my voice. And if I die with this experience in me, it was for nothing. So if I can let somebody else know that men are going through this, to let kids know that this is not a healthy upbringing, that it's very toxic. If I can reach somebody, then I've done some.
Dave, you're amazing, and we appreciate that. And that I think it's truly admirable that you turned your life around and you went from one day thinking something to the next day getting up and saying that it's not worth it for your life for something that you can't change and somebody else was doing to you. And I think that's a lot of what alienation is because we are blamed for a lot of it. And so we have to make sure we understand that we can't change how they act or what they do. It's only our reaction. And you are heroic in doing that and realizing that. So thank you very much. And for your efforts in the community and what other dads are going through. It's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, I've had a coworker approach me when I said I was speaking in Cambridge in the UK, Cambridge University, admit that he was in an abusive relationship too. And if I hadn't said anything, I wouldn't have known.
Mick said something when he first started this podcast, and it was the definition of resiliency. I think you said something like it's not extraordinary, it's ordinary. And as humans, we're just built to be resilient. And this is maybe one of the toughest things anybody has ever or will ever go through. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy in being resilient, because it's not that you have to be resilient once. And maybe being an alcoholic or addicted to something is the same way. I don't know, but you're constantly going through it, right?
I thought when I left, using the kids as pawns would stop, that that it was all directed indirectly towards me, using
Mhm,
me as the
mhm,
bad person. I thought that it would stop, and it just got worse. Through the separation, I realized that I'm trying to rationalize with an irrational person,
mhm.
and that put a lot of the whole struggle into perspective, that I'm banging my head against the wall trying to use my rationality for somebody that
That isn't rational, right?
yeah,
You're being rational and being mindful, and they're not, and it's hard to work with somebody like that.
it is, yeah, and always thinking, "Okay, finally, she's gonna just admit that, yes, she was wrong and stop the lies and just move on with her life," but no, everything's gotta be a fight, and sadly, the kids have lost out on what could have been a better childhood.
You said a couple things there, but one is just realizing that we are being manipulated, our kids are being manipulated, and it will never stop. I just talked to another gentleman on Tuesday night. I was at the state house, and he thought he had it going very well with his children again, and it was 50-50 for the past couple of years, and then it started again. He said it just won't ever stop. So, with that being said, what are some practical strategies for building resistance over time that you use that maybe you can share with some people?
Again, self-care was huge, and I'm still trying to learn to put myself first,
Mhm.
and without being healthy for myself, I couldn't be healthy for my kids. I was overreacting to things. Always tried to take the high road in the separation, but I saw the kids being pulled between the 2 of us, so I had to step back and hope that things will turn around someday. Now they have with my youngest, because I've worked in the school with them. Setting boundaries
Mm,
for how I was going to be treated, what I would do with my time, staying away from toxicity, surrounding myself with more positive people, and joining groups that
mm.
understand alienation, that understand domestic abuse.
Those are great points, Dave. Those are really good, because I think a lot of times we ask ourselves, what's self care? And people think that it's maybe going on a walk or it's maybe taking a bath, but you're literally, your number one was put yourself first. And I love that. Put yourself first and be healthy for your kids.
And when I was going through the depressive part of after leaving and not having the kids in my life daily, I learned to not feel guilty about sleeping most of the day or
Mhm,
not accomplishing much. Even if it was just having a shower one
mhm,
day, that was an accomplishment. Now, TikTok is great for education, but I found like I was absorbing myself in everyone that was speaking of narcissistic abuse just because I could understand it and relate to it, but it was keeping me in that negative mindset.
That's a very good point. But you said you joined some groups and you were surrounding yourself with positive people. So how did you switch that?
Just seeing that I was stuck, I wasn't getting anywhere. And when I was meeting new people, that instead of focusing on the present and the future, I was focusing on the past and bringing up
Mm,
the past all the time. And that wasn't fair to people I was meeting or myself. And I learned to celebrate the small wins, whether it
mhm.
was just having a shower or whether eventually, when I built on that, it was going out for dates. I love meeting new people. And so everybody has a story. So I always felt like I could take something away from their story or what they have commented on my story. I For whatever reason, I was built to be a dad. It
Mhm.
was in me,
Yep.
and I loved it. I was a stay-at-home dad for a long time, so it was so hard to not have the kids in my life and to have them turned against me. I have met somebody now that is so supportive and so understanding and so normal. That's what I say to her. You're so normal.
Again, appreciating the little things and the small celebrations, right? You met
Yes,
someone normal.
yes.
That is absolutely wonderful and how you've turned it around.
Yeah, that's interesting, Dave, because I was curious about signs of alienation. That was one of the questions that you found early on. And so while you're talking, so I can reflect on some of my things, so I can really relate to what you're saying. I was also a primary caregiver when our daughter was very small as a baby, but I would go on academic trips. And here's one incident that would come back from a trip, and I got our daughter just this little figurine from the trip. And our daughter was about 3 years old at the time. And so I jump in the car. Oh, it's good to see everybody, wife, child. And I had this little figurine from the trip. And I handed it to my daughter. And my wife just went ballistic. What did you get for me? Why didn't you get me something? And I thought, this is about a 3-year-old child, just a little figurine. And what I noticed, that was one of those early signs at a very young age that something was seriously wrong. And you made a comment about there's something lacking in the other person's life and you can't fill it. And I think that was one of the things that I observed as well too, because give a long story short, my wife felt unloved by her mother. And I don't know about anybody. How do you overcome not feeling loved and cared for by your own mother? But she, in therapy, she wrote out this whole long thing. Mom, I don't know if I even love you at all because you never cared for me. So here I am trying to fill that gap, right, as in a marriage. I go, "Well, I can't ever fill that." It's just impossible. But I was curious then what kind of signs that you saw from alienation and what kind of resilient things that you do once you notice those signs of alienation.
I think recognizing it was huge for what it was and that I wasn't going to change her. I realized that nothing was permanent, that even the bad times aren't going to last forever. There is a student that I work with at the high school who used to tear classrooms apart, and I was told he hates men. And so I said, I'll see if I make a connection with him. It turns out that he was abandoned by both his mother and father. And so no matter what I do is, like you say, not going to fill that void.
A lot of people like to just fix things, males in particular. Is it hard to admit when you can't fix the person or the problem or your marriage?
I can jump in. So I can head to that because I don't know if it's hard to admit that you can't fix it, but here's one of those things that's a definitely difference between men and women. So when you're relating to a woman or a lady and she's telling you a problem, it's almost like I have to ask, do you want me to help you fix this? Or are you just venting? Because it's extremely difficult for me to understand because as a man and as a person who makes decisions and does things, that's what I do. So
Mhm.
I've understood that women don't necessarily want to be fixed or want to fix. They just want to vent. And I've had to ask that person, okay, do you want me to just listen? I'll listen. Or would you like me to fill a program here to go step one, step two, step three? Let's get this. So that's how I do. So I'm just saying it. That's my approach. And Dave, maybe I have your perspective as well. But yeah, I think that's a really good question. It's a difference between men and women and how they approach problems and think about them.
Yes, I automatically think of what can I do to fix it? And so that's why I dragged my ex to counseling numerous times. And she even said, I swear I wasn't going to talk about myself after we got out of one session. And I thought, "She's not committed, and she will
Mhm.
never be committed to counseling." I had a woman that approached me after a speaking engagement and said that her son was struggling too and didn't want to go see a counselor, and I said that getting the right counselor can make a huge difference. For me, the first counselor I went to see in 2005 said to me, "How dare you leave your wife while she's pregnant?" And I thought, if the roles were reversed, why is it okay for me to be abused and have to stick around because my wife is pregnant?
Mhm.
But I did finally find a counselor that I see to this day every once in a while who totally gets it, and she was the first one to recognize that it was abuse that I was going through. So counseling has been great for me once I found somebody I connected with. And it's funny because I all had them tell me I'm a good father, and I knew it in my heart. But when you are told by numerous people that you're not, who don't know the situation or who are making up lies to make you look like a bad parent, it's tough.
How can individuals use experiences of failure and setbacks to build resistance and become stronger?
It's easy to say now that I'm out of the situation, but I don't feel now that there is any failures. It was always a setback and a learning experience because every time I learned something, I built on it.
I think John Maxwell wrote a book on that, right? Fail Forward.
Oh,
I've read
really?
several times, yes.
I stayed for 20 years for my kids and put up with that. But I knew in 2019 that I couldn't anymore. So I think seeing everything as a learning opportunity, and if I had to do anything different, I think I would research more on how to protect myself and how to protect the kids, what I could do after I got out of that situation, because it was just one night I drove home from work and I heard my mother who had passed away. I heard her voice say, "You deserve to be happy." And that
Mm.
was huge for me. Um, it was that night that I went home and I said, "That's it. I want a separation."
One of the questions I'm curious about, you had said, and we've heard how important your mindset is. And there's this aspect people call the growth mindset that every time you approach some sort of challenge or issue, that you look at it as a growth opportunity. I'm wondering if you could address your mindset and how important that is, and especially thinking of a growth mindset to say, don't take it as it's a step backward, but it's an opportunity to grow and how that has helped you to develop the resilience that you have.
Yeah, mindset, I think, is the key that opens the door to resilience,
Mm.
because without that, you're stuck in that negative thinking. But again, making sure I was healthy physically, making sure I was getting exercise, eating properly was huge. And I find a lot of noise overwhelming, and working in a high school all day, it's very noisy. So
No kidding, really, Dave? I can't even imagine.
I love coming home and just having at least an hour to
Mhm.
myself where it's nice and quiet. Meditation, actually, it was a St. Patrick's Day. I can't remember what year it was, but there was a psychic medium. If you believe in this, there's a psychic medium in our area doing a group reading. And at the time, I was thinking, am I a good father for staying in this relationship? I'm doing it for the kids. And so the medium came over and read me, and she said, "Your dad is coming through and he's pinning a ribbon on your chest. He says you're a good father."
Mm.
And then next day I woke up and I opened this book of dad poems. For whatever reason, I hadn't looked at it in months. And here was this little paper ribbon that my oldest had made up, and it said, "My wonderful father."
Mm.
And so that helped change my
Mhm.
mindset that, yes, I'm doing the right thing.
That gives me goosebumps, Dave. That's signs if you need them, right? That's signs, right?
Absolutely. Yep. And so that helped reframe my mind and that I was a good father. There's some validation there because I wasn't getting it from much people and shutting out the negative comments from my ex, from other people who she had as her flying monkeys, as they say,
I
to
was just gonna say that, Dave. You're flying monkeys. I was gonna say that.
yeah,
Yep,
uh, to make their comments. I thought they have no idea who I am, so just let it go in one ear and out the other. And the hardest thing I've had to come terms with is my oldest, who we used to say, "We're like the same person." And then to have my oldest alienated from me and say, "I don't know who you are anymore because you're only getting one side of the story," and I bet most of it's not true,
mhm,
is very tough. But again, I have to focus on myself and creating a father and an environment that they want to come back to.
exactly. And I think that's hard. All 3 of us on this call were, we'll say, primary caretakers of our children, and so we always put their priorities first, and a lot of parents do. I'm not discounting any other parents, right? But a lot of parents put their children first. So when you're found in this alienation whirlwind, I think it's so important, and you keep coming back to it, is you have to put yourself first. You have to prioritize yourself, and that's very hard for us to do, parents that were so dedicated to their children, and they were number 1 to realize that we have to put ourselves first, and we unfortunately, as much as we love them, we can't change a situation. We can't change the environment they're in. We can just create a better environment and a different environment for if and when they come back.
Yes.
Best example is on the airplane, right? So when the airplane has a problem or an issue, we, the caretaker, think, well, or my child first, but they always tell you no, that when the thing drops down, you have to put it on you first, because if you are not healthy and if you are not ready to assist, then you're no good. So that's the kind of looking for yourself first in order to be able to be helpful to a child. And you have to think of yourself first, because otherwise you're no good to them.
Exactly. Yes. And the night that I realized how bad the abuse was when I moved into my apartment by myself and I locked the door for the night and I got into bed and I thought, I'm safe. I'm not going to be belittled anymore. I don't have to listen
Mhm.
to the arguments that are started. And that's when I knew there was more damage than I expected. And I thought I was doing the right thing for the kids, but I didn't realize the damage it was taking on me because I didn't pay attention.
And let me ask you this, Dave. Were you really being the best father you could be in that environment? Or are you a better father now that you're separated and connecting with your kids?
Oh, I'm definitely a better father now.
Because
Absolutely.
you were teaching them to take abuse in a way, right? And you don't want that for them in their future. And it's hard for us to think 10 and 20 years and 30 years down the road, but that's not what we want our kids to be okay with or accept for them.
And I had said to my youngest a few weeks ago that I was at a conference for domestic abuse, and they had said, "Oh, you would know a lot about that, Dad." And I tried to keep so much from them.
Mhm.
Obviously, they were watching, they saw what happened. We often don't give kids enough credit for what they see and hear.
So, talk to us a little bit about how an individual can maybe recognize or be self aware to better cope with stress and adversity and the different things that we experience going through alienation.
I think practicing observing how you feel and paying attention to how you behave. I Is somebody triggering you on purpose, as it was my case? And are you acting out of anger for something that's not related to the situation?
Have you guys ever kept a a journal of your feelings like a diet. It just hit me when you were saying that. And I'm like, maybe we should journal where we're at, what kind of day it was, right? Was it a bad day? Was I feeling guilty? Was I feeling overwhelmed?
I did start journaling for the kids when they were younger so that they could have a history of when they were young and to look
Yeah, me
back on.
too. Me
And
too.
then it just became a way of me to vent about what was happening in the marriage. And I realized that's not fair to the kids to read that someday. But after, through the separation process, I had to get all my journaling together and notes and stuff. I begun journaling again. And it is that feeling of how I dealt with the day and what I was feeling about the kids, about the heartbreak and the small achievements. It's much nicer now because I'm doing it out of a healthy place.
Yeah.
I think taking responsibility for my feelings was good. That the day the separation came in, I was at school and I almost went home sick because almost immediately I felt angry. I allowed myself to feel anger because of what my ex put my kids through. And I allowed myself to feel that because I pushed it down for so many years. I felt like I couldn't be angry. It would be used against me or and I built on that. I could see my ex without not being triggered.
A
That's
huge
big one.
one.
Yes.
It's huge.
Yeah, I do have diagnosed PTSD because of
Mhm.
that. Don't forget to breathe, to take your time to relax, to take time to yourself and not let everything overwhelm you. Small things can really overwhelm you when they build up. And it's a lifetime process. I'll be dealing with this for as long as I'm alive. I've told people my greatest revenge is to be able to outlive my ex so I can have a few years of peace.
Yeah. Yeah,
uh,
and you're not alone in that. I think everybody, when you go through something like this, it's a lifetime thing, right? You never really get over it. And you said something too that I might have heard it on our podcast before, but I know I heard it the other day and I wrote it down and that's why I remember it. And anger is you're letting go. You're working through it. You're moving through it. Anxiety is you're stuck. So it's good that you said you recognized your anger. You let it be, right? You let yourself be angry because that means you were moving through it and you were coping it. And anxiety is where you're stuck.
yeah, I remember coming home when we were a family unit and my dad had died that morning in the hospital and I was out at the barbecue and I had a loaf of bread or whatever and I just started whipping the loaf of bread against the barbecue and the wall. I just had to get my anger out. And my ex looked at me judgmental and I said, "Don't say a word. I have to do this."
Mhm,
I have no problems with showing my emotions. I don't have to hide from anybody. I'm an open book. And I
mhm,
think it's relieved a lot of that pressure that's built up inside me. It's incredible how that attracts people who are like-minded.
Mm,
I have a coworker at school that has gone through something similar, and I wouldn't have known about that if I hadn't been open.
mhm,
And her and I are a great support for each other.
mhm. I was sitting the other day at a restaurant and I overheard the table next to me talk about custody. My ears popped up and they were saying, "We're not seeing our grandson much because our son doesn't see him much." And I was like, I start listening, and I'm like, "Don't do it, don't do it. Okay, I'm gonna go do it." And I went and introduced myself and talked to him, and you know what? It helps heal us too, because you go talk to other people about it, you make them feel like they're not alone, and it helps us understand that we're not alone either. There's other people out there that still don't even know that there's a name to this or a thing or that this is an epidemic. So it's just it's inspiring that you're doing that, Dave, and you are talking to people and you are being open. So, how are you doing that? You mentioned you talk at Cambridge, and we didn't talk about where you're from, but what are you doing to get your word out?
So far, I've had one chapter in a compilation book about my
mm,
experience, speaking engagements and being open with my experiences. I have no qualms with approaching anybody because, yes, it is healing me. and we have no idea the positive effect it could have in somebody else's life. And sadly, we don't realize what an epidemic it is.
It's a worldwide epidemic. And we have problems in our court system in the Americas. Where are you located?
I'm located in Ontario, Canada. I hear a lot of horror stories about through people that have been through the process of going to court. Oftentimes, it's making lawyers rich. It's quite biased still for parents.
It's making them rich, it's breaking us, and it's shattering our kids' future. But
And that's what I struggled with the most. Like, why can't my ex be reasonable and understand what she's doing with the kids? And she's not hurting me anymore. She's just hurting the kids continually. The first lawyer I spoke to said to me, "You've got enough to go for full custody." And she looked at me like I had two heads when I said, "I don't want I want 50-50 custody because I'm tired of the fighting. I don't want to go to court. It's just a waste of my energy, a waste of my time, and it's still putting the kids in the middle of a fight." Um,
so even Dave, even though everything you've been through, you would still looking back go 50-50 because some people think we're doing this out of spite and we just want full custody of our kids.
I want I so much wanted a life that I had for my kids. I know it's never going to happen now. It's been changed.
It sounds like to me you just wanted your kids to have a mom and a dad equally involved in their life and love them for who they are,
E
and you didn't get that.
exactly, and I'm a little on the fence because I consider this kind of treatment, of kids child abuse, and
100% it is. 100%, Dave.
I have no use for child abusers.
Mhm.
They're hurting innocent lives.
Well,
Yeah,
Dave, it's been such an honor and a pleasure to talk to you. I appreciate you being very open and honest, and your story is so impactful. It will help others. I know it will.
thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dave. This has been really inspiring, and I could spend another hour explaining how closely my story matches what you are saying. So I'm sure that you're touching and reaching a lot of people with what you're saying because your words have power, your words have strength, and you've been really resilient. I appreciate your time and appreciate you sharing your story with us today. Thank you.
Thank you both.
Yep.
If you like the show, please like, subscribe, share, and please positively review on Apple Podcasts because it really helps us. We'll see you next time. Day is full.